Hello. So let's start at the beginning with the obvious question, what is cryptocurrency? Well, cryptocurrency at its heart is a type of virtual money not controlled by banks or governments or any single governing entity. So there's no country in the world that has created, or rather owns and controls a cryptocurrency. And in fact, cryptocurrencies can be created pretty much by anyone. And they are managed in a collective way, which you'll see more about as we go through this course. Now, this first successful cryptocurrency, which was called Bitcoin, and well, there are some who said there was eCash and a few others before that, but I did say successful. The first successful cryptocurrency was Bitcoin, and that launched in January of 2009 after the financial meltdown of the 2008 debacle. The key to note here is that cryptocurrency is decentralized, which means, again, it's not in a central place, and it's distributed, which means that there's no single server running somewhere on a computer network that could become a single point of failure. And the other thing to note here is that all of the transactions are securely encrypted, hence that's where the word cryptographic comes from, and they're protected on something called the blockchain. Which we'll talk about more elsewhere in this course. But for now, just think of the blockchain as a distributed, again, there's pieces of it all around the network. And by the way, when I say network, I mean the internet. The blockchain is distributed and runs on the network, and it's a piece-by-piece ledger-like database. Now, ledgering, I mean financial ledgers. So it's a record rather, excuse my accent, of all of the various transactions that have occurred with respect to that cryptocurrency. It is borderless, permissionless money. That's really important to some people because what that implies is that no single country controls that cryptocurrency, and the cryptocurrency, because it lives virtually out on the internet, it has no country borders to trip it up. And because you control your own money, your own cryptocurrency, you don't need to ask anybody. There's no third party involvement. So if you want to send money from yourself to a friend, or you want to receive money from a friend to yourself, then you can do so, and you don't need an intermediary to actually facilitate it. So where does the value of a cryptocurrency come from? Well, the value of cryptocurrency, unlike traditional fiat money, and I'll explain what fiat means elsewhere in this course, but that's the kind of currency that you get from your own country. I'm in Canada, and I get Canadian dollars. If you're in the US, you get US dollars. If you're in Europe, you get euros. That's currency. That's what fiat currency is. It's currency issued by the government or controlling entity, where you live. But the value of a fiat currency is determined by the government. In many cases, they say, it's worth this much money, and then it fluctuates according to various other financial considerations within your geographic area. But a cryptocurrency gets its value from an agreed mathematical formula. You might say that its value comes from a process, and it's a set formula that applies to something called work on the virtual computers, because the way that most of these cryptocurrencies run is that in exchange for running programs on the networks, these cryptocurrencies are assigned value. It's a bit it's a little bit more complicated than I'd prefer to explain, not because I can't, but because it generally makes people's eyes glaze over, and we're only just getting into this course. I'll probably touch on it further elsewhere, but know this much. The value of a cryptocurrency coin is determined by a formula, a mathematically predictable formula, okay? Not some fluctuating random number that a governmental official or group determines. The key there, of course, was it's regulated by math, or as I like to say, it's regulated by process, not politics or people. In other words, if you know the process and you understand the maths, then you can be confident and be assured that the value of said cryptocurrency is predictable. If that value was determined by a person or politics, then, as we've seen, banks can fail, governments can fall, and currencies can go with it. Now, that's not to say that a cryptocurrency won't fluctuate, but it fluctuates based on predictably different reasoning, okay? Simply put, the intrinsic value of your cryptocurrency is a function of performed work within a computer system. I touched on it about 2 slides back. That is mathematically calculated and exempt from manipulation and external influence. This is important because it truly means that it can't be tinkered with. People can't easily influence. Of course, you can always influence, to some degree, but it is far more insulated from the types of things that influence current fiat-based markets. Well, that really does sort of drive home the point that a cryptocurrency is a mathematically stable store of value. By the way, store of value is one of the qualities of money, which we will be covering elsewhere in this course. Ironically, people have this idea that they think they know what money is, and usually their ideas are a little bit right, but there's a few aspects of money that most people overlook, and the ability to store value is a key. So that's why cryptocurrencies, in particular, are very good, because they're mathematically stable. The other thing that makes cryptocurrency very good to use is that unlike fiat money, where a government can turn around and print more of it, thereby devaluing the single unit value of the dollar or the euro or this or that. So I mean, if you start off with, say, 1 million units of your currency, and then the government says, we need more, let's print another 1 million units. Well, what was once a controlled and valuable asset is now worth half as much. That's what happens when governments keep cranking out currency. Then they have to do other things to sort of mess around with interest rates and the like to ensure that your currency holds its value. Well, in the case of a cryptocurrency, the supply of the cryptocurrency and the issuance, in other words, the rate at which new cryptocurrency coins are released into the market, is again mathematically predictable, which means hyperinflation isn't possible. Hyperinflation, by the way, is where, like I was using the example, where your currency literally starts crumbling in value because the government keeps producing more and more currency. Cryptocurrencies are transparent and they're open source. If you're not familiar with programming, open source means that the code doesn't belong to someone. It actually is out in the general or the public domain, which means that anyone can actually see, how the blockchain and the technology behind these cryptocurrencies runs, and it means that you can actually create new derivative versions if you wish. The other thing that keeps cryptocurrencies humming along quite nicely is that voluntary cooperation. There's organizations of individuals all around the world working together in a single unified fashion to support the technology that underpins the cryptocurrency realm. Now, let's talk a little bit for a second about how we make sure things on the blockchain where your cryptocurrency is recorded, how that's kept secure. Well, it's kept secure by system-wide checks and balances. So no single transaction is initiated and or approved without considerable validation and verification. It's a bit of a two-edged or double-edged sword, actually, because what that means is that there's more cycles and more work done to make sure that the transaction is valid versus, single issuance of a transaction and completion of a transaction. This way around, the checks and balances are done globally, which stops things like double dipping or double spending. You won't be sending out a transaction or issuing a transaction with respect to cryptocurrency and have your cryptocurrency account tapped twice or spent twice, because this distributed network has significant checks and balances and verifications and validations, and in some cases I think it's 3 or 4 times it needs to be checked, and sometimes I've seen systems that validate up to 12 times before there's a consensus that the validated transaction is legit, in which case it then gets stamped into the blockchain ledger and it becomes a part of history. Fixed. Cryptocurrencies are an autonomous free market system. So again, circling back to some of the things we said earlier in this presentation, what that means though is that it runs free of external influence, direct external influence. There's always indirect influence, and it quite literally runs itself. Now, one thing to bear in mind is with traditional fiat money, like cash in your hand, you'll go to a bank if you have a bank account, and the bank will tell you what the value of your account is. I mean, it doesn't hold money per se; it holds a number, and that number represents your amount of currency, very similar to a cryptocurrency. But the bank ultimately controls that. And if an external party decided to interfere with the bank, they could get between you and your money. Well, the thing about cryptocurrencies is there's no bank. There's this distributed ledgering system that records all transactions and ultimately allows you to figure out what you have, and records very, very carefully, obviously, the amount of cryptocurrency that you have. But you are your own bank. You are ultimately responsible for controlling and managing and protecting and securing your cryptocurrency.